Después de esta intervención de los profesores de la Universidad Europea, vamos a dar paso a una intervención muy internacional. Hemos tenido ya una intervención internacional con los profesores de Portugal. Ahora vamos a tener otra intervención internacional, esta vez en lengua inglesa. Tenemos una comunicación de una profesora, de la profesora Lydia Chavez, que es Professor of Journalism en la Berkeley Journalism School. Ella no ha podido venir, pero ha enviado una comunicación, bueno, pues exactamente igual que cualquier otra comunicación. La ventaja es que yo puedo relajarme y no tener que estar pendiente del reloj, ni de los minutos, ni del tiempo que falta, porque esto es enlatado, tal cual. Confiamos en que funcione, vamos a probar a lanzarla desde aquí. Si no, la lanzamos desde otro ordenador donde sabemos seguro que funciona, pero vamos a probar a lanzarla desde aquí. Como se ve enseguida, si sí o sí.
Good afternoon. I'm Lydia Chavez. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, and I am also now the editor of Mission Local, a hyperlocal or local site that covers San Francisco's Mission District. I'm going.
Por si acaso. Sí, por si acaso voy a dar un poquito de contexto de esta comunicación. Lydia Chavez es la directora de Mission Local. Mission Local, que es esta primera pantalla que tenemos aquí a la izquierda, es un proyecto periodístico que surge vinculado a la Escuela de Periodismo de Berkeley, que además ya saben ustedes que es una graduate school. No tienen estudiantes de grado, sino que son estudiantes de posgrado. Surgió de esa manera. Lo que cuenta Lydia, la profesora Chávez en esta comunicación, es el desarrollo de ese proyecto junto con otros proyectos y cómo desde hace un año aproximadamente ese proyecto vinculado a una escuela de periodismo originariamente se ha convertido en un medio independiente. Entonces este es el contexto de la comunicación. Sí, quizás sí sea bueno dar esta visión global. Perdón por la interrupción, pero continúo.
I'm going to talk to you about our experiment in Berkeley with hyperlocal sites. And this is a story that has two chapters because we were, up until June, we were part of Berkeley Mission Local, and in June we spun off and officially signed the papers in late August. But essentially from spring 2014 on, we became an independent site. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that as well. The three sites that we ended up with at Berkeley in 2008 were Mission Local, Oakland North, and Richmond Confidential. We started with 5 sites, which was too ambitious because we could not keep them all running year-round. And to be credible within the communities, we all felt that we needed to keep them running year-round. Why did we start the experiment? We started the experiment because we saw a landscape, a very difficult landscape. There were massive layoffs in the industry here that are still going on. The newspaper that I started with in New Mexico was closed, the Albuquerque Tribune. There was talk of the San Francisco Chronicle having to close. So we saw a very difficult landscape for our students, and we decided to try and prepare them for a different world, one in which they would be required to do print, video, photography, audio, and one in which they might have to be entrepreneurial and get out there and start their own site. At that point, we had classes that taught the basic reporting class and prepared our students for a print internship, and we changed those classes to each having a hyper-local site. So there was Mission Local, Oakland North, Richmond Confidential. Again, to begin with, there were actually 5, and we reduced the sites and the classes to 3. From the get-go, the experiment was ambitious and very much an experiment. I mean, we were doing things that we had never done before. For one thing, I was going from being a professor, where I got copy ready for other newspapers that might publish it or might not publish it, but other eyes were looking on that copy. So all of a sudden, I was going to be the last eyes on a piece of copy that was going to go public. which was scary for a lot of us that had worked at very big institutions. My last job at a newspaper was at the New York Times, and we were, accustomed to things being done right. And all of a sudden, we were on a stage in which things were done quickly, as well as we could, and sometimes there were errors, and it was very scary. So these were the 3 sites. We each got to pick where our sites would be. I live in the Mission District in San Francisco, and this gives you a sense of where the Mission District is. I felt it was a perfect area because at the time it had nearly 50% Latino population, an immigrant population, there had been a lot of gentrification in the late 1990s with the first .com boom. It was an old neighborhood that had all of the urban problems and benefits. It's very rich culturally because of the Latino community. The Latino sort of intelligentsia lived in the Mission District. But we had everything from games to, someone who then became the poet laureate of the city, to a new tech industry. So it was a very interesting urban area. And the other thing that it had going for it, the population was about 60,000, is that it had, I'm forgetting, anyway, great area to start a site. It had a lot of commercial. Most neighborhoods in San Francisco will have 1, maybe 2 commercial streets, and the Mission District has at least 4, and it seems to keep adding commercial streets. So I thought this was very good in terms of, looking toward the future, sustainability, and whether or not there would be a large enough business community which benefits from a healthy press to sustain it. We, very ambitious from the beginning, and it was amazing how students responded to this. We had a website at the school before. I think it was just called Northgate News, and students hated having their pieces there. They felt like that was the lowest of the low to be on Northgate News, and that somehow it was better to be in the Berkeley Voice or any small newspaper around better than the Oakland North. Better than the Northgate News, the online news thing that we had to begin with and that we had for many years. But somehow with the sites in Oakland and Richmond and the Mission, the students really signed on to the idea that they were covering this community, that they were responsible, and that they could do anything. And it was, in terms of teaching, I've never had a better teaching experience at Berkeley. The community held students accountable. When errors were made, they knew immediately. But they also could get traction in an area and build up sources in an area and benefit from the students who had been there before and left behind sourceless. So the texture and the quality of their work very early on became very good. This was an experiment we did in the first semester as we were putting up the sites. There had been immigration raids, and one of the students suggested doing an expose on immigration. So we put together a whole experiment. These are video stories, radio stories, print stories, history stories. It was a great package. This is just more, you can see video here. We also were very open to the community, and I had this policy at Mission Local of anyone from the community could come in and we would help train them. And one of the people who came in was Rigoberto Hernandez, who, again, when you're reporting a lot in a community, he got onto this story about how San Francisco, it's a city that tries to legislate everyone's behavior, was very conservative in terms of how it looked at restaurant inspections. So if your restaurant in San Francisco was closed because of rats, you could put up a sign saying it was closed for renovation. Whereas everywhere else in the country, if your restaurant was closed by the health department, you had to put up a sign saying it had been closed by the health department. So Rigo did this story. It was a series of 5 pieces. And it ended up changing the way in which the health department inspects and tells consumers what's happened at a restaurant. So it's an example also of the way in which I approach local news. Yes, there are stories that are only the people in the Mission District would have an interest in, but there are many stories that what happens in the Mission, happens in the city, happens in the state, happens sometimes internationally. So it's a way to look at news from the ground up. And I think this is a perfect example of how doing that really benefits the storytelling. So this was a story that began with a volunteer. When I got a new class in that fall, this series ran in the late summer, we decided to try and plot restaurant inspections around the city, and we began first with the Mission District. And so we plotted. You could go up on our site, click on one of these dots, and see the health inspection from the city. The city's own website was really terrible, and you could really, it was difficult to find what a restaurant inspection was online. This was very popular, and again, these sites were ambitious. So when I saw how popular this was, I thought, let's do it for the whole city. My students just about died, but we spent a big weekend and we plotted the whole city and put this up. So you could click on a zip code and come up with the same map of inspections and see which restaurants did well and which restaurants did poorly. We also at Mission Local had an open policy about collaborating with other classes at the university. There's a wealth of intelligence within the university. And we collaborated, we were the only ones to collaborate with an undergraduate geography class that was doing mapping. And it was looking and mapping in a place and trying to really give viewers a different idea of what was happening on the ground. So this is one of the maps that came out of that. The red and the blue are the areas of gang injunctions, where members of the gang cannot be caught, and if they are, they're sent back to jail, or charged or put on probation. But what she did was plot all of the new hipster bakeries that were around in the gang injunction. So to give people a different sense of the neighborhood that they were going to and the edginess of the neighborhood that they were going to. And just to think about geography differently. We did a lot of different kinds of outreach, and again, very experimental. There's a lot of graffiti in the Mission District. So we did an experiment of producing some wheat pasting, doing some wheat pasting ourselves, and putting them up, but also cueing this and with the code to a story about whether or not this is legal. And this is something that politicians, that candidates, that organizations, that, as you can see, boxers do in the Mission District all over. And our piece looked at the legality of this, and we tried to draw attention to it and to ourselves by doing wheat pasting ourselves. That was a lot of fun. We also began, because nearly 50% of our population is an immigrant population, and we were bilingual from the spring of 2009 on. We also felt like there are a lot of older immigrants or even middle-aged immigrants who may have a computer at home for their children but do not feel comfortable on it. And so we started putting out a print edition to reach those people. And it was very successful. We did reach people. It was great to see things like this. But it was, an experiment to try to end the digital divide. So all of the materials that we put out were bilingual. We put out a food map that was bilingual. We put out an experiment of mission memories, because the mission is going through, and was even at that time, gentrification. And it's a fairly disturbing and unsettling experience for any long-term resident. But we found that two things sort of bridged the communities. One was everyone here has an interest in food, And the other is everyone has an interest in history and the history of the neighborhood, which is really rich. So we put together this, my mission was a history project of different people's memories of the mission or favorite places, and it also had a lot of maps in it. We did outreach. To get our name out there, we stamped our mission local on the bags of a popular taqueria, and then they used them to put their takeout orders in. So again, ambitious, a lot of experimenting. We also put together a history map, a history app, iPhone app on Mission District history. So here's just more of our outreach. The experiment was, very successful in terms of readers. At the beginning, it was very tough. We had, in the first year, an average of 3,209 uniques. And, what we found that spring, there was a big news story with American Apparel moving in. And we were all over that story. I remember at one point a student saying, she's tired of the story. And I said, you know what? Our readers are not. We have to think about new ways to report on the story. And we did. The coverage was great. And our traffic started to go up. And I think that story and the way in which we handled it really put us on the map. Our monthly uniques went up to 56,000. You can see in 2011 they stayed pretty steady. 2012 they took a jump to 69,000. This is average a month. So we were going from 100,000 to, I think we, at that point in 2012, only went down to about 50,000. And then you see in 2013 we took a drop. 2013 was really a shifting point for us. We got a new dean in January. I was actually on sabbatical in London. I took a year of sabbatical that I had been delaying for 5 years, and really went to study art history and just to use my brain in a different way. And when the new dean arrived, he was not that happy with the hyperlocal experiment. I think he viewed them as costly. I didn't agree with him on any of these points, and a lot of people didn't, but he decided that he wanted to diminish the importance of the hyperlocal sites, to not run them year-round, and to experiment with a different kind of class, which is, certainly his prerogative. And, used to say that won't be very successful. So when he started talking about not staffing the sites year-round, I became very upset. I made it clear that I would not do that at Mission Local, that we had to staff year-round. And when I returned from sabbatical, we kept the site going with the school that fall, 2013 fall. But the dean asked me if I would be interested in spinning it off as an independent site. It had a large readership, it had traction in the community, and I think he saw it had really been a very important experiment for me, in which I was learning a lot about local coverage and how you manage this. And I wanted to continue it. So then in spring of 2013, I call it the biggest challenge of all. We essentially became a startup. The other two sites, Oakland and Richmond, were not funded in the summer. We somehow scrambled and found independent funds to work to keep Mission Local going during the summer, and we've kept it going. And we are now looking for startup funds. We have a great team. This is our team: Daniel Hirsch, Andrea Valencia, Laura Wienes, Cristiano Valli, and a business person, Allison Leroy. We're doing this on a very, very tight budget. I don't know how long we ourselves can sustain it, but I would say, we're doing really well. What we've discovered is, first of all, when you're a training site, you're focused on training students. When you're no longer a training site, you can develop a personality. And as a site, that's what we've been working to do. We've also been working to make the site a lot more functional. And Cristiano has done a lot of this, and he's just done an amazing job. And I have to say, you know, this is the wonderful thing about having a community feel that they like. Cristiano is an Italian journalist who sent me an email just saying that he lived in the neighborhood and knew a lot and would like to volunteer. And I feel like I must have done something right in my earlier life. This is what I tell Cristiano, because he walked in, he works there a lot, he volunteers, and he's done massive changes on the site. He's really been critical to the improvements. But, you know, Laura Weenus is someone who graduated from NYU, returned, and she wrote me an email this summer and saying she'd just like to come down and do some work for us, volunteer. She came down, and I mean, she's been so good, we haven't been able to let her go, and now she's paid as well. Andrea Valencia was our translator from the spring on, and an incredible resource who also has become an incredible reporter. Daniel Hirsch was someone who volunteered, started volunteering while I was gone. We started paying him when I returned because he was really contributing good pieces, and now he's staffed. Allison Leroy is someone who we advertise for a business developer. We call her a refugee from corporate. She lives in the neighborhood, has a small child, and wanted to do something different. So again, this is a very tight budget. No one is being paid a wonderful salary, but everyone can pay the rent. And we're trying to see if we can get an outside investor to come in and give us some money to experiment with a new platform, because we have a sense of how we can experiment in Mission Local and develop a model that will scale elsewhere. So far, you know, the experiment in startup has been terrifically successful in terms of our traction in the community. As you can see, our average uniques have jumped by 20,000. So for the first 10 months of this year, our average uniques have been 83,397. So that's been great. It's, you know, feeling that somehow this consistency of the coverage and the consistency of the people doing that coverage has been a huge benefit. I'm no longer worried so much about training people. We're still experimenting a lot in terms of outreach. We had one experiment in which we asked citizens to just send in photographs like you would do on Instagram. And interestingly enough, we didn't get that much traction on that. Then we started something called The Mission Wakes Up, in which we asked, I did a first essay of, you know, getting up in the morning, walking around the block, and taking photographs, and then posting them as this block, and putting it up on a map and coloring out so that people could see that that block had already been done. I never would have dreamed that this would work, but we started getting a lot of buy-in on this experiment, and it's been terrific. We've had more than 60 volunteers volunteer to get up and do an essay in the morning, and it's lovely. So I think I'll end it here. We're very much in the mode of looking for investors. It's a whole new world for all of us, since our background is journalism and not business. But I think we have, you know, a great idea and a lot to offer. So good luck to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to speak here.